Moving on to Calgary now, Patrick, we're going to compare. We just talked about Toronto and the Toronto market and what's happening there. Now let's compare that to what's happening in Alberta. Let's talk Calgary. Let's talk Edmonton. Right now, there's people feeling some a little bit of emotionality around the Calgary market, Patrick, because things are changing. Let's say in Calgary, and you have a cautionary tale about Alberta. We're going to get to that in a second, but you're actually cautioning investors. So don't spill the beans too early on that. But what's changing right now, Patrick, in Calgary?
Well, I think there's a couple things. This goes back to if you look at these charts and you start to see what we've talked about many times, which is the condo market in Calgary. And we know, and I know, that a lot of the money that's going into the Calgary condo market is out of province. A lot of individuals from the Toronto market, for example, who look at Calgary and everything looks like it's on sale. And I'm going to say again, that for those who are investing in Calgary condo market, if you're not working with a very experienced realtor who knows precisely the location of those condos and what's going on, I think you are setting yourself up for a lot of heartache into the future, depending on what your strategy is. Condos in Calgary, condos in Edmonton for rental units, I think they're just poor. They're bad. They're this high risk. So that's it.
Check out this chart on year over year changes in new listings. Patrick, look at the condo. Both of them are up, but look at Calgary, that blue one. Oh my gosh, it's crazy how much it's gone up.
Yeah. And that's, we talked about this, gosh, we've been talking about it for 3 years, I think, JG. But, this is a kind of a repeating pattern of what happens in Alberta. It happened in Edmonton. Now it's happening in Calgary. And again, if you're not really clear, it's like I would never buy another condo in Edmonton, but I own a number of them now. And it's not that every single condo would be a bad investment. I just don't think you're going to get a great return. And I'm talking about Edmonton, but that pattern is going to be exactly the same in Calgary.
Now, I want to draw your attention, folks, to this chart here, because this is what's interesting. If you look at this Calgary housing starts on a 12-month rolling, you can see how there's a lot more single family. If you compare that other segment we did, Patrick, where we talked about Toronto, condos were still quite high. Rentals had skyrocketed in terms of housing starts recently, like in the last 12 to 18 months. And single family kind of was dipping down. And look at Calgary, very different, where single family starts actually lead the way, then condos, then rentals, albeit rentals is way up here as well. And that's because some of the incentives that are in the market to build rentals right now.
Again, this becomes, a difference in actually even municipal or provincial rules that are allowing building, and everybody's jumping on this bandwagon in Calgary because we know that there's so many people moving into that particular province. So this is early signs that saying, really, it's more of a cautionary. Let's pay attention to the supply that's coming on because immigration and economy have actually got to continue. Because there is a chance you can have an overbuilding issue in any city, and Calgary is no exception to that. So we have to always be looking at what is the immigration, the interprovincial migration, what's the uptake into that province. And I'm very, very optimistic. What Danielle Smith is doing is just brilliant in terms of leadership, and I think Alberta is going to do exceptionally well. But that to me is like, don't ignore that. You don't have to put it on the front burner, but don't ignore it. Know that that's what's going on, and we need to keep an eye on it.
Danielle Smith for president? Is that what I just heard, Patrick?
For prime minister, for sure.
That's what I meant, prime minister. Check out this chart. I know you're a big oil fan. I know you have lots of predictions on oil, Patrick. I'm not sure if your predictions have come true yet, but if we wait long enough, I'm sure they will. Let's talk about oil production. This is a kind of an interesting chart of what's happening in Alberta for oil production. I think this may surprise some people.
Well, yeah, I think it is, but really, we don't expect a lot of growth because they're kind of maxed out right now, given what is going on with pipelines and what they can do in terms of production. But we know that at this point, when you've got this kind of production, Alberta's economy is very, very healthy. That's all part of it. The good news around all of it is it's not the only thing that's driving Alberta's economy, but it's always good to see this because it also represents a lot of money coming into the province. So we generate a lot of revenue for the rest of Canada too. So, what can I say about that?
Listen, Alberta floats the rest of the country, and Albertans always want us to know it. So let me just acknowledge it right here on the show.
Yeah, okay.
But what I find fascinating about this, Patrick, is we know, because we've showed these numbers before, where the employment in the oil sector in Alberta has been, it hasn't, it's a good thing for Alberta, where the economy is much more diversified than it used to be. But I'm fascinated. Like, I mean, 2010 to 2023 isn't that long. And there's been some significant increases in production here. Take a look at this. It's pretty, some great, way more than 200% growth here in terms of production. But diversification has happened at the same time. And I think that's a good thing.
Well, it has happened, and that's the good news about what's going on in Alberta. The other thing about the oil industry right now, and I've said this before, is that the dynamics have changed with technology. So even the individuals who are working in the industry, you've got far more engineer type brains that are in the industry, way more technology that are in this industry. So all to say this is that oil production is up. That's good news. It represents jobs, but the actual types of jobs that represents have changed dramatically.
Now let's just talk about Alberta's kind of general economy here. We see GDP in terms of the forecast of what we plan, or what the forecasters. This chart comes from ATB Economics. For the ATB team, we know is very, very good. 2023, 2024, 2025, Patrick. Definitely not what we saw in 2021, 2022, but to be expected.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised with these numbers. I'm pretty confident that, I'm not a big fan of forecasts overall, but to your point, is when we look at GDP, especially from ATB, which is the Alberta Treasury Branch, that particular, ATB works with a lot of small business owners as well. They're really dialed into, small towns, small centers, as well as the bigger cities, of course. But they're more on the pulse of what's going on economically in that province. So as much as that may be a pretty optimistic forecast given what's going on, I think it's more trustworthy, for example, than, let's say, that even the Bank of Canada or StatsCan or RBC for that matter.
Now let's look at job vacancies here, Patrick. You'd see right now we got almost 87,000 job vacancies in Alberta. Has definitely come off its highs of just under 100,000, but significantly more than its kind of long-term average. If you see between 2016 and 2020, the average has always been around 40 to 50,000. We're almost double that, Patrick, in terms of job vacancies. You can just see the activity that's going on in Alberta.
Well, if you connect the dots back to, that little cautionary thing we did about supply, right now it's not an issue because, in fact, we have lots of jobs in the province and people will continue to move in to get those jobs. People will continue to move in because of the lower cost of living, the lower cost of housing, and all of the things that we've talked about many times. I'm continuing to see some YouTubers, out there talking about this is ridiculous and it's going to crash. And I want to reach out and go, have you ever been out of the province? Like, have you ever existed outside of your backyard? Anyways, that's a little bit sarcastic, but ultimately, when we look at what's happening with Alberta, it is in fact on fire. And I think we're going to see that continued given the jobs that are there. You're going to have lots of immigration.
Should we invite them to the show, Patrick? Can we do an Alberta duel? I'm thinking like a bit of a duel, like old school,
We could. I've thought about it. I really have. I can't watch him because he drives me crazy.
A couple more charts on this, Patrick. You could speak to the labor force and then the labor force participation, and then we're going to wrap it.
Yeah, listen, there's not much to say. The chart speaks for itself. When we look at the labor force, this again, when we look at the long-term real estate success formula, what do we need? Positive GDP. We need jobs and we need population growth. And if you've got those three things, all those three things will, in fact, work together. That will drive the real estate market. It'll drive the rental market. People will come into the province, which is happening, and they will, in fact, rent. Why? Because they still aren't necessarily got a credit rating, and or they're new to the country, whatever that might be, and or they don't know where they want to live yet. They moved from Ontario. I just talked to a couple of coaching clients that I have, and one of them is a couple who's moving from Ontario to Edmonton. And something, they don't know where they're going to live yet. They're going to rent. So this is what's happening. And when we look at this kind of job growth, we know that that's going to continue.
Beautiful.
If you like what you learned here, go to the description below and subscribe for our free Insiders newsletter, where you can also stay up to date for our upcoming events and our courses.
If you want to see more stuff like this, click here. If you want to see the entire show, click there.